welcome to the deep dive.
Oh.
Okay, let's set the scene. January 5th, 2024, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 is climbing, 16,000 feet over Oregon.
Right.
And then suddenly, bang, a door plug, basically a panel where an emergency exit could be, but wasn't on this plane. It just rips clean off.
Just gone. Into the air.
Yeah, sucked phones, debris, everything out. A gaping hole. Now, miraculously, no one died. But the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, they were really blunt. They said this accident never should have happened.
Mm-hmm. It's a stark statement, yes. And it really points to something much, much deeper than just, one faulty part.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here to do today. We're going to dig into the sources you've gathered, accident reports, financials, cultural analyses, the whole stack.
Right.
Our mission is to try and understand how Boeing, this giant of aviation, got to this point, this crisis point, and what it all means for flying. Let's unpack it.
Let's do it.
So, starting with that immediate crisis, Alaska 1282, the NTSB investigation, it started peeling back the layers pretty fast. And what they found was, astonishing, wasn't it? It wasn't just random bad luck.
No, not at all. The key finding early on was that critical bolts, the ones meant to secure that door plug, they were just missing. Completely missing. But maybe even more alarming or, more telling was the paperwork situation or lack thereof.
Okay.
There was zero documentation showing that the door plug had ever been removed or worked on. And that's supposed to be a standard, meticulously recorded procedure. It points to a complete breakdown in just basic essential protocols.
Wow. No paper trail at all. That's incredible. What about the people involved, the human element in that specific event?
Well, the sources suggest the staff working on that door plug were largely untrained for that specific task. Get this. Only one person out of the 24 on the door team actually had experience removing that specific plug.
Just one.
Just one. And guess what? He was on vacation when the work was done.
You're kidding.
Not kidding. And this really points to what the NTSB called out directly, this overarching pressure to rush production. It seems that pressure just consistently overruled basic safety steps.
Pressure to rush production. That phrase just keeps coming up, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned it points to something deeper. How does this Alaska incident connect back to, say, the tragedies with the 737 MAX?
Oh, it's a direct echo. A really grim one. You think back to the 737 MAX crashes, the 346 lives lost. That was down to the MCAS software failures.
Right, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System.
Exactly. That system, meant to push the plane's nose down automatically, was fatally flawed. It relied on faulty sensor data, and crucially, the development of that system was outsourced.
Outsourcing again.
Yes. So when you see the missing bolts, the lack of paperwork, the untrained staff on the Alaska flight, it stops looking like an isolated incident. It looks like another symptom, a symptom of a systemic problem that's been plaguing Boeing for a while.
So not just a one-off mistake, but something systemic. This pressure to rush, this rot, as some people are calling it. Where did the sources say this really started? When did things begin to change inside Boeing?
That's really the core question, isn't it? The consensus from the analysis seems to be that Boeing's fundamental identity started to shift pretty significantly back in the 2000s.
How so?
Well, Boeing was always known, revered even, for its engineering prowess. Engineering first, always. But then came this pivot towards financialization.
Financialization, meaning?
Meaning the corporate strategy started prioritizing financial metrics above all else. Cost-cutting, shareholder returns, stock price, those became the driving forces, seemingly pushing that legendary engineering focus into the background.
Okay, financialization can sound a bit abstract.
Right.
But the sources really highlight the 787 Dreamliner as a key example of this shift, right? How did that play out with the Dreamliner's design and production?
The Dreamliner is a perfect case study. It's almost like the canary in the coal mine. Boeing outsourced something like 70% of the Dreamliner's production, 70%, to over 50 suppliers around the globe.
70%, wow.
Yeah, an unprecedented level of outsourcing. And the result, a massive loss of direct control over manufacturing, and maybe predictably, a whole cascade of quality problems, fuselage gaps that wouldn't close properly, batteries catching fire.
I remember the battery fires.
Right. There was even this specific case with titanium parts failing because an Italian subcontractor used the wrong faulty alloys.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows the huge risks of that kind of dispersed production without rock-solid oversight from Boeing itself.
So this huge outsourcing experiment with the Dreamliner, the loss of control,
Yeah.
it must have hit Boeing hard financially, too, not just in terms of reputation or quality.
Oh, absolutely. The financial consequences have been stark. We're talking $11.8 billion lost in 2024 alone, 17,000 jobs cut. And maybe the most potent image, the one that really sticks, is those 81 undelivered jets. Billions of dollars worth of aircraft just sitting there on the tarmac, some rotting in storage, as one source put it, for nearly 5 years because they can't meet quality standards or get certified.
That's just a staggering visual, all those planes grounded. But, okay, if Boeing's internal culture was shifting so dramatically, where were the regulators? What about the FAA, the external oversight?
That's the other critical piece of the puzzle. And unfortunately, the picture isn't reassuring there either. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has actually admitted publicly that they were too hands-off with Boeing.
Too hands-off. What did that actually look like? How did that allow these problems to grow?
Well, it showed up in a few ways. Inconsistent audits, for one. Just not enough scrutiny, often enough. And then there's this really concerning practice. Inspection records, crucial historical data, were apparently being destroyed after just 5 years.
5 years, that seems short.
It creates huge blind spots. And maybe the biggest issue was allowing Boeing to self-certify certain critical parts. They were basically allowed to grade their own homework.
Including on MCS.
Including, chillingly, on the MCS system itself, yes.
Wow. So Boeing inspecting its own work on the system that caused those crashes. I remember the NTSB Chair, Jennifer Homendy, asking point-blank, where was the FAA? She concluded, the last barrier of defense failed. What does that do to trust when the watchdog itself is seen as failing?
It fundamentally erodes it. I mean, the whole system relies on checks and balances, right?
Yeah.
The public, the airlines, everyone depends on these layers of safety. When that final barrier, the regulator, isn't fully engaged or is perhaps too deferential, it creates a vacuum.
And things fall through the cracks.
Exactly. Corners can get cut. Now, the FAA is trying to respond now. They've put that production cap on the 737 MAX, 38 planes a month, MAX.
Right.
And they explicitly cited systemic quality issues as the reason. So it's a clear public admission that the problems are deep and ongoing.
Okay, so a cap, an admission, signs of acknowledging the problem. Is there, maybe, a new hope for Boeing? They do have a new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, and he's an engineer, which seems significant.
It does seem significant, a return to engineering roots, perhaps. Ortberg has definitely promised a renewed focus on safety. And importantly, that promise has actually drawn some cautious praise from the NTSB.
That's something.
It is. It's a positive signal, for sure. But look, the road to recovery is still incredibly rocky. The obstacles are huge.
Like what? What are the biggest hurdles still ahead beyond just fixing the production line itself?
Well, for starters, labor shortages are biting hard. Boeing is apparently struggling to find and keep mechanics, especially those with the security clearances needed for sensitive projects.
Like Air Force One.
Exactly. It's causing major delays there. Then you've got regulatory bottlenecks. The certifications for the newer 737 MAX models, the 7 and the 10, they're years behind schedule. There are about 30 finished planes just sitting, waiting for the green light, basically held hostage. And then there's the ongoing chaos with suppliers. It got so bad that Boeing had to take the drastic step of bringing Spirit AeroSystems, a massive supplier responsible for fuselages, back in-house because of repeated defects found in their work.
Bringing them back in-house? That's a huge move, undoing some of that outsourcing.
It really is. It shows how serious the supplier issues became.
Okay, that's a mountain of challenges.
Yeah.
But I did see one recent data point, maybe a glimmer of hope. In January 2025, Boeing apparently delivered 44 planes, which actually put them ahead of Airbus for that month. How significant is something like that, one good month?
Look, it's definitely a positive data point, a small win, perhaps a moment of relief for them, but we have to keep it in perspective, right?
Sure.
1 month's delivery numbers don't suddenly fix years of systemic problems or instantly rebuild a damaged culture. It shows they can deliver planes, yes, but the real test is consistent quality, sustained performance, reliability across the whole system, month after month, year after year. That's the long game.
Right, consistency is key. And then there's still that huge question hanging over everything. Accountability.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned those Department of Justice deals, the ones that let Boeing avoid actual criminal pleas after the MCAS crashes.
And the families of the victims are still fighting those deals in court. They don't feel justice has been served.
Understandably. And it feels like trust overall is just deeply damaged.
Yeah.
You mentioned Qatar Airways leasing interim planes instead of waiting for Boeing's new Air Force Ones.
Exactly. That kind of move, leasing $400 million temporary planes, it speaks volumes about the lack of confidence right now. The whole debate around accountability, whether the measures taken are enough to prevent recurrence, it's far from settled. For many people, the trust just isn't there yet.
So wrapping this up, this whole deep dive, really feels like Boeing is facing this fundamental conflict, this core dilemma. Can new leadership, even engineering-focused leadership, truly fix a culture that seems to have been corroded by decades of prioritizing profit over engineering?
That is absolutely the central question. It's the billion-dollar, maybe trillion-dollar question for Boeing right now. Can they genuinely rebuild that engineering-first culture?
Yeah.
And I think, stepping back, Boeing's struggle highlights a really critical tension in our modern world, doesn't it? This constant push and pull between corporate profit, the effectiveness of regulation, and the absolute necessity of public safety, especially in these super complex, high-stakes industries like aviation.
That's a great point.
What lessons can we take away from this? As consumers, as citizens, what does it tell us about oversight and corporate responsibility in other critical sectors we all rely on? It really goes way beyond just Boeing or even just airplanes. It's a fundamental challenge.